1 minute loop video of the
No.
generally speaking thing?
No, I mean, I did that last time because I was like gonna go shower, and so I was like, fuck it, I'll turn it on. We'll do like a ramp up. We'll give it a minute. Instead, we'll shit post for like 3 or 4 minutes in case people want to roll in. Did I tweet
That sounds
last
good.
time?
Did you?
I don't think so. Live for a hot minute. Talk way more interesting than Valorant. There we go. I need a. Oh yeah, I did tweet last time. Remember? Because I tweeted that hilariously awful fucking screen capture of you. It was just like quality timing.
I really appreciate that. You're so kind. You're so kind.
All right, so let's tweet.
By the way, that was a great tweet of whole. We planted a lot of trees today.
Holy, we planted a lot of trees. We did plant a lot of trees. There. I don't know if you could write a script with more trees in it or with more ocean drakes in it for FlyQuest. Holy shit! I was just watching that. I was just like, and another one. Oh, actually, what I'm gonna do before we do anything is I'm gonna replace my my battery in my headset real quick because this one's getting low and I have to replace it in like half an hour. I no longer can hear you for like the next 5 seconds until it turns on.
Okay.
And we're on. My headset's fucking sick. It's wireless with 2 batteries, and one battery's in here that's powering it, and then the other battery, it's got like a home base that the other battery goes into charge, and so all of the feed goes to the base, but the base lets me select and pick where I send my audio and shit. So
that's cool.
So I can split it and I can have it so I can hear my stream PC and my gaming PC, which sounds really interesting, but that's just because it's 3.5 millimeter. I can split it. Obviously, you normally can't split USB. Like if you took a USB headset and put it through a USB splitter and then plugged it into 2 computers, you would not be able to hear both computers, right?
Yeah.
But I wanted that type of solution, but for what is normally a USB headset. And normally 99.99% of wireless headsets are USB. Because they are using a wireless adapter through USB to like ping your headset with the data. In this case, this is like my cool workaround where it's like, because I'm guessing this headset's like a really high-end console headset. That's my only guess. And because of that, it's got like the bells and whistles to be able to do that. So sick.
Cool. Are we live?
Yeah, we've been live.
Oh, cool. Did you make a tweet?
I made a tweet.
Wait,
I tweeted it. Kia's already here, so you know we're live. Kia's in the chat. Oh wait, no, I didn't click tweet. I just did it.
Oh, now you did. Okay. I was like,
I love how
I was trying to.
My picture, like Twitter's caching for like Twitch, like for like the like quick and the summary of your link is awful. So it's like my ancient picture, and it says Dota 2 customs with Skadoodle. Which was like, I don't know, a month ago. Actually, it was probably like 2 weeks ago, but it feels like it was like a lifetime ago. Wait, is my Twitch photo actually still that? Maybe that's the problem. Oh, that's the fucking problem. Why is my Twitch photo this? Problem.
Of you just
update profile. No, I don't want to hear myself. No, I don't want to hear myself. Stop. Okay. Upload photo. Large icons. Where is my photo? What the heck? Wait, do I not have my headshot in here? Oh, that's awkward. I guess I never used it on this computer. That's tragic. My headshot
Interesting
is...
that you linked your Facebook to your Twitter. That's very odd.
Oh, did my Facebook post too?
No, but just like for your website.
I have a Facebook. I have a Facebook fan page for my website. What?
Interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean I don't have a website. If you go to danan.gg, I don't remember what it does anymore. Oh yeah, I broke it. I've been meaning to fix it. It used to just relink to my Twitter. But at least it works right now for my email. So it's like me@danan.gg. I have like an email system, and I have like my short linking, so I can like take screenshots and upload them, and it like auto uploads them to my Google Cloud, and then it makes a
That's pretty cool.
custom link, so I can. Where's it at?
That computer science major really paying off.
Yeah, pretty much. There you go. Here you go, Mark. If you look at Discord, I can make cool links like that for my private screenshots.
Ooh.
Getting hella emails these days.
That's a beautiful screenshot.
Thank you. How many total? Okay, so we are doing this. Kia's here, but she didn't say anything in the chat, so I'm a little bit sketchy. Why is Tanner watching? Tanner, what are you doing? The hell? Are you getting us kicked off? Am I kicking us off? I don't remember why we did it last time.
Oh, you ready?
No, not really.
No, well, you let me
I
know
was
when you're ready.
this close to being like, Mark, next week. Or actually, what I was going to say is tomorrow. And then I was like, I'm better than that. I'm not going to be depressed. This was a good split. Everything's chill. I think I'm just
What?
exhausted because I woke up at 5 a.m. to play Valorant.
Wait, are you allowed to say that you're playing it? Are you just keep
Yeah,
streaming it?
yeah.
That's-
No, I'm just
okay.
not. We're just not allowed to compete for viewership. That's all it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, with LCS.
I better be allowed to say it because Nadeshot's tweeting it. It's really awkward if I'm not supposed to say anything if he's tweeting about it.
Yeah. So is it good? You're
Yeah.
allowed to talk about it, right?
Oh yeah, for
It's
sure.
good.
No, it's fantastic. Like it's basically CS:GO with some like, so CS:GO. One of the most renowned things about it is that it's like very basic, right? Like you walk up to the game, you know immediately what's happening, and while that's cool, that does leave a lot of room for like struggling to make it fun for everybody. Like it's very obvious that there are people who like playing FPS games, and so when they play Counter-Strike, they're like, I love playing that game because it's an FPS game. But there's tons of people who like can dabble in Call of Duty and have a good time, and they can dabble in Battlefield and have a good time, but they really can't engage with Counter-Strike. Like they can watch it and they can appreciate it and they can respect it, but like actually playing it and having fun themselves is like a really big challenge. And I think Valorant has done an insanely good job bridging that gap where it's still high skill, it's still very intense, it's still very impressive, but it's fun, accessible, and like attractive to like a more generalized audience, which is something that's like always going to be a good thing when you're trying to like scale a product like that.
It seems like it's basically, from what I've seen, that it's like CS:GO but with Overwatch as a secondary kind of influence.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even like. I guess from the cartoonier graphics, I would almost say it's more of a Fortnite, like a more of a Fortnite reference than it is anything else with respect to how the graphics play out. But the actual movement and the mechanics of the system are all like Counter-Strike parrots, like pretty effectively identical when it comes to like gunplay and that kind of stuff.
Did you see the tweet of the guy who basically did a 2-minute video talking about how every person ever is like, guys, I'm going pro in Valorant. I don't have a team, and I don't have anything else, but like I just know that it's really cool, and I'm gonna be a pro.
Yep, every time. I mean, I guess you can respect the hustle or something, right?
But you think about it.
I mean, I think I did a tweet. I think I did a tweet about this actually. Let's see if I can find it. I literally just tweeted it like I said someone wrote a bot that makes a list of like Twitter ads that had OW in their name, then FN in their name, and then soon VAL. Like, there's always so many, like every fucking time.
But I mean, you think about it, and let's say Ninja or Shroud, like they all played other games before.
Yep.
And then because they were a bomb in those other games, when they jumped into the next game and they were, first and really, really good, then they just popped off. So I feel like every streamer understands that, so the second that the new game comes out, they're like, all right, there's a chance. This is my chance.
Well, I mean, so Overwatch was like one of the first games that created this phenomena of like transitioning into a new game and like making a name for yourself in an already like relatively saturated market of existence, right? Like there was already Counter-Strike, there was already League of Legends, there was already like Dota and all these other games that had like popped up, and all of those had their core famous like collection of players. Like Counter-Strike had obviously like Nothing and Skadoodle and all them, whereas Dota obviously had Fear and all of like the original like the EG members and like those guys that everyone's like super fangirl over. And League of Legends obviously had like the old Dignitas roster, has Bjergsen, Double F, like all those kind of things. And every time a game like this comes out, and especially for this specific game, everybody sees an opportunity to pave the way for their name, for their brand, because for example, Overwatch had Surefour and it had Mendo and it had Jake, XQC, inevitably, like all these people are like highly regarded as like huge personalities in each of those respective spaces. And so obviously a new title like this is going to be very attractive for people who are trying to make a name for themselves, because it's so much more difficult to crack into an established scene. Like that's why there's like a constant complaint across tons of different scenes where it's like, we're not developing new talent. Like the new players come in and they don't stream at all and they don't focus on their brand because they only get noticed if they play really well. And that's because at that stage of the game, that's what ends up mattering the most. But early on, playing well is not the like only primary thing that's going to matter. A lot of times when it's this early on, it's about networking and being relatable and accessible to like your teammates, to your coworkers, and then ultimately to the fans. And tons of people see an opportunity to like see if they can get their like their bump up off of like something like this.
Who do you think is going to rise to the top?
I don't think there's anyone in particular that's like standing out a ton with respect to Valorant yet. I think the obvious things to point at are going to be Counter-Strike players that are making the jump. I think the retired players maybe is less interesting. Like they'll be there and they'll be good, but I don't know for like retired Counter-Strike players is the thing you point at and say, hey, like let's just get 5 retired players and they're going to be insane in this scene. I think there will be, just like in Counter-Strike, there's like new young players coming into Counter-Strike that are being dominant and being very relevant. And they're kind of showing up the veterans. I think a good example is like the new Dignitas roster for Counter-Strike is still like they're competitive, but they're not like it's that's what used to be 5 insanely high level world-class elite players that you would never think would be on the same team that have come together, and they're competitive, but they're not like suddenly dominating everything they're playing in. I think that's what retired Counter-Strike players would look like in this game, where they'll be relevant, but I don't think they'll come out swinging like that. I think interesting areas to pay attention to are going to be the Apex players that are making their transitions. I think players that are walking away from Overwatch that are used to a lot of the like strategic mechanics that are relevant in Valorant still. The ones that can pick up the gunplay really well are going to be really interesting to look at, because Counter-Strike is carried almost solely on gunplay. There is so little utility in that game because you only have access to, ignoring the decoy, which is like a 0.001% use case scenario grenade. Between like smokes, Molotovs, incendiaries, flashbangs, that's the list right there. And it's aggressively hampered down by how much you can have, and they punish you with it by making it expensive, as well as you lose it when you die. So in Counter-Strike, when you have all this utility that you build up, there's not a lot in the first place. It's not nearly as impactful. It's much more expensive, so it's harder to get to. And it's got a risk factor, because if you die without using it at all, it falls off your body and you don't get it the next round. Valorant is different in that there is probably 1 or 2 extra utility mechanics per character, which right now there's like 9, 10, 11 characters. So that's already like 20 more utility mechanics extra. And that's not counting the fact that a lot of the utility mechanics can be higher impact than the Counter-Strike utility items. And then finally, that's ignoring effectively like the ult system, and that's ignoring the fact that in Valorant, when you die, you don't lose these. You don't lose your utility. So like the grenades you had or like the abilities you were holding carry over into your next life. All of these things lend just like a tiny, like probably like 5% more of the game towards the like mechanical strategy and strategic strategy around the use of utility. And I think there's an opening for players who can pick up the gunplay of Counter-Strike, but can use that extra 5% of like utility strategy to like shine over like Counter-Strike players who aren't able to adapt. But yeah, I think it'll like primarily be Counter-Strike players that are most interesting and dominant, especially early on. And then as we go on, I think we'll see like a new young generation of players who are able to like be competitive, while the few Counter-Strike players that can adapt do.
So then would you say Apex, Overwatch, Counter-Strike players in the end?
It's still going to be Counter-Strike players on top, but the thing that's really interesting that a lot of people don't recognize is that Counter-Strike, I mean, it's a behemoth in its own right with respect to how large it is. The players that you see in all of the tournaments are not like that's not the end of the line of like how many players there are that play at a very high level. So I think what we're going to see is like there is probably Counter-Strike has to have one of the largest like semi-pro presences with respect to like population. I think because there are leagues like Face It, there are leagues like ESEA where there's like a lot of middle tiers to be able to separate people out. It means that there are tons of players who are inevitably on the cusp of being professional at a high level that are like very, very good. And maybe their only difference like is that they're mechanically amazing, but they haven't been in a team environment where they're able to take on and work out the like last couple of percent they need to be like a pro CS player. And I think Valorant is going to be a window for those players who already have all of the gun mechanics to be competitive at a high level in CS:GO, to then exercise their brain power and exercise their like strategic capacity to like overtake the like either the older CS:GO players or the less adaptable CS:GO players. And I think players like Apex and Overwatch players, a lot of them were those players. A lot of players for Apex, Overwatch, even some Fortnite players, they were Counter-Strike semi-pros who went into those games, and they're really good gunplay mechanics wise, but like the game itself is like less about gunplay, right? Like BRs inherently have a lot more RNG and are much more like broad and open scope and concept of how the game plays out, with like less team members. So when you like collapse it back down and you give them some of those tools they learned from those other games, I think when they add that to their like CS:GO gunplay capacity, that they're going to be the ones that have an opportunity to shine.
So it sounds like essentially the ocean of players that are the best have all really the ocean comes from the CS:GO players that are just not good enough to hit that top tier in which they're playing for a team, or as you said, that they just don't have that team play experience, so therefore they're really, really good, but they just haven't played on a team.
Yep, and it's really hard to break into those scenes.
So then those people then kind of fell into Apex, and are still really, really good, and may or may not be playing on teams from there. And then from that's gonna then go into Valorant. So even the people who are coming from Apex, for the most part, they're really coming from CS:GO, Apex, and then Valorant. Yep.
There's very few players who were like at a high level in games like Apex and even like Call of Duty Modern Warfare, like that haven't played CS:GO at a high level, or outright were just strictly playing Counter-Strike at a high level and elected to play those BRs because they became popular. It's the same reason we saw Counter-Strike players be so aggressive about playing PUBG initially. It was from a pure standpoint, like relatively solid gunplay. The servers themselves were miserable. And obviously the mechanics of the strategy around that game and like the map and the RNG and stuff was like a whole different thing. But from a like how could what transferable skills were there, Counter-Strike players exampled that most Counter-Strike players were like very, very capable of PUBG, like across the board.
Oh yeah, I forgot about PUBG as well, and H1Z1 kind of, and all the battle royale stuff. So then that leaves Overwatch. That seems kind of like almost like this random third party. I mean, you talked about utility and the mechanics, and not mechanics. Well, just the utility in which that's really just 5% of the gameplay, which may actually give them a leg up. But it's really, do you think that any Overwatch pros or soon to be Overwatch pros like at that level are going to really be top competitors or not?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think they can be. I think it's going to be whether or not other players have the patience, and like depends on elitism. But Overwatch players are ingrained and networked in enough now that I will not be shocked to see if a handful of them make the transition. Obviously, Mendo is a good example at Liquid of a player who was a high-level Overwatch player, jumped over, made the transition to Apex for a short time, and is now electing to move over to Counter-Strike. I think he's a player that is showing that he will probably be better at Valorant than he was at Counter-Strike, and he was still pretty damn good at Counter-Strike fundamentally. But it's kind of showing you like that specific subset of players I'm talking about who are more like flexible about their gameplay, so that they can not only be good at the gunplay from like the Counter-Strike perspective, but also apply those like Overwatch mechanics and Apex mechanics that they've learned to use.
So we're kind of like halfway through ish, and I was going to dedicate today to kind of the history of Danan, but are you okay with splitting up between today and next week?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. All right. So I want to know the history of Danan from, you can tell me as much or as little as you want from, I don't know, growing up in Iowa. But I guess getting your computer science degree, then going into Dignitas, then C9, then Complexity, then C9 again, and then GG. I think it's really interesting of how connected you are in the space, and especially with your experience that you were a part of three OG teams. And in addition to that, not only OG teams, but also within those teams then branching out into, as you said, 12 different games, 17 different teams. You have the depth and the breadth of esports. So taking a step back from the beginning, we can skip the whole high school and Iowa stuff and get straight to computer science. We can skip the computer science stuff. Let's just get into Dignitas. Talk to me about your experience of how you got into Dignitas, how that experience was. Yeah.
So, sorry, Brian. So, Dignitas was interesting. That was actually before. I can't remember if in high school or college. I'd have to double check the timeline. But what's really interesting about that is I was working with the team back in the day. Like one of the first things I was doing was building rosters for teams. Like they were effectively consulting, like pulling me on as a consultant to like advise and build out rosters to like compete at the challenger level. So that means we're going all the way back. We're going all the way back to when I was in, I guess it would have been college.
Let me just take a step back real quick. Because for the most part, like whenever I think of you or other people, it's like, yeah, Dana knows esports. It's like, of course, like you're going to ask him for this and whatever. And so if we're starting at the beginning, and the beginning is, well, yeah, I was building rosters. It was like, well, why are they asking you to build rosters?
Yeah. So, well, it's actually funny because when you say like Dana esports, I'm kind of like Riot Games, where it actually took me a really long time to add the S to esports at the end. I was esport for a significant amount of time.
At the end, though.
Yeah. It eventually becomes a very big S, but initially I was a player years and years ago, back in like the super early days of League of Legends, like basically beta into season 0/1. And basically I was in like a weird position that I ended up getting into college. I got accepted, and I was like the first person in my family to like go to like a 4-year college. And unfortunately, I had a full ride. Which, like, when you say unfortunately I had a full ride, that sounds weird, and that's because that was right around the time where everybody was dropping. They were dropping everything in their lives to try and pursue League of Legends, which was hilarious to me at the time, if I'm being honest, because we were playing for $50 on the weekend. There was no upside whatsoever. It was literally just like a scene dominated by high school, college, and unemployed people who were willing to just sacrifice like 12 hours a day for literally nothing. You were getting paid nothing. If you won a tournament, at best you were getting $50 on the weekend. It was all pride, which obviously made it super pure, right? Like the people who played were insanely passionate and cared like a lot. And so when I was like stuck with that decision, and I was like, okay, I would have to consider dropping out of college, which I had just gotten in and just got my full ride. And again, first person in my family, because I'm from like a tiny little town in Iowa, where it was like not normal to like go get a degree. I ended up coming down to the tough decision of, okay, while I am very good at this game, if it doesn't work out, everything kind of collapses. And so I was like, it doesn't make sense. Like, I'm not in the headspace. I'm not in like the position to be one of these people. Like, again, I reiterate, the people who were pursuing this, who elected to, were the kinds who dropped out of high school. They dropped out of college. They quit their jobs, or they didn't have jobs in the first place. And they were heavily relying on their family to take care of them. And that's like an unfair expectation I honestly think anyone should have for the people around them and the people that care about them. Luckily for a lot of these players, actually not even for a lot, luckily for enough of the players, it did happen to work out, right? Like, they were well taken care of. They had a support system that was willing to like help them see through that kind of thing, right? Which is like abnormal and crazy. And I've seen the stress and the strain it can put on families when they do that, right? But no, at the time I just like that it's totally not realistic for me to turn down what was, you know, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of scholarships and grants and that kind of stuff for college just to play a game where maybe I'll get $50 on the weekend, right? Completely unrealistic. The problem is when I turned around and made that decision, my team was not pleased. Because I was playing with a team. We were playing in tournaments on the weekend. Like, we were practicing. It was a whole thing we were doing. And so, like, they understood and they respected it. But it was, like, really unfortunate because then they came to me very shortly after and were like, hey, we're degenerate video gamers. Like, we're quitting our jobs. Like, we're kind of, like, we don't know how to take care of ourselves. We don't sleep. We don't eat well. We keep screwing up. We're not booking scrims. We're not showing up to scrims on time. We're forgetting to show up to scrims. We're forgetting to sign up to the tournaments. We're forgetting to patch our game before like all of the basic logistics of like just being a person who sits at home and plays video games competitively. Somehow they found a way to like screw all of those things up, right? So I was in a position where they were like, hey, you were the one responsible one, right? You're the one who like always did all of this and like effectively managed all of these like different mechanisms and systems we needed to like upkeep to be a competitive team to practice and play. So they're like, you know, it doesn't sound cool, but like, can you still do all those things? And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, you want me to keep doing all of the really boring, like labor intensive, just kind of like the, like obviously the stereotypically like mundane shit, but then also not get the reward of getting to play and getting to participate and getting to win, right? And they're like, yeah, pretty much. And I'm like, you also want me to do this and I don't get anything. Like, there's no prizes. Like, we're playing for $50. Even if I asked for $50, like a cut of it, that's not significant, right? The amount of hours I have to put in to do this. And they're like, yeah, pretty much. And I don't know, something in my brain was like, yeah, fuck it. Sounds like a hobby. So I did it. That's what I did. I just like helped on the logistical side and supported as best I could the players I had been playing with. And then that's where it kind of like started spiraling into something else where as I was helping them and supporting them, like very small organizations came into existence because there were people with money, not a significant amount of money, but just like enough money to be able to like arguably say, hey, I'll pay you $200 a month to like, well, it's when you put it back the way it was, you were just playing in your free time and the tournaments were on the weekends. And no one was like paying for stuff. So look at it this way. To play in the tournaments, it was like you had to pay, I think it was like $10 a month to be part of like the website. And that website is how you signed up for tournaments. So the website made money off of your subscriptions, your $10 a month, and they paid it back in tournament prize pools. So they would make enough money to cover their overhead and pay their employees. And the remainder would go into their prize pools to pay out for the tournaments. What was nice about this was that meant it scaled. So as more teams signed up, the bigger it got, the prize pool scaled up, right? Now the problem is, you would think that this is not the case, but again, remember I'm listing people who dropped out of high school, dropped out of college, quit their jobs, or didn't have jobs. So when every weekend you're like, oh, we need $10 to sign up for this tournament per person, that's $50 to sign up for a tournament. You'd be surprised how hard it is to back then scrounge up $50 when 4 of your players are in high school or dropping out of high school, right? So when teams came up and said, hey, I'll give you this like pittance amount of money, a tiny amount of money, just to wear my jersey in the tournament, or back then you didn't even use webcam, they would just say like, you would have my name before your name. So you would be like, in this case, Golden Guardians, GG Danan, can you be, in this case, Pulse or Fornot Esports? Put that in front of your name and I'll give you $100 a month, right? And that basically covers all of your fees for your tournament signups, and then maybe buys you a couple meals, right? And at the time, when the competing offer to that is nothing, it doesn't exist, there's nothing else competing with this, yeah, everybody was like, sure, I'll play for I'll play for Team Green Forest, and I'll play for Team Muffin Star, like all these like random teams, Rock Solid, like all of this stuff. You would totally do that, because why not? Like, at least you're getting paid for it. And then obviously that started like the initial memes of like, haha, I'm being paid to play video games. But this is when things got interesting, because I was like working with that team originally. We take on a team who wants to like basically pay for our fees and like cover our overhead to exist at least. And not in a significant way, but just enough to like count as like a relationship. And it goes well. Like, we do well, we perform well, like we win a couple smaller things. There aren't bigger things to play in the first place at the time, because this is before like anything had really spun up. So we're getting like attention, we're getting regard. So then that continues to scale. And there were like old guards in esports for like other games, for other scenes, for like Counter-Strike and StarCraft and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't like unheard of for people to like play games competitively. It was just unheard of for there to be like a whole ecosystem of stuff that was like happening and scaling as fast as it was. And so what ends up happening is I'm like helping these teams, and other teams are noticing. And again, they, for the most part, like other teams had like players they liked, or they had like core pieces, but the kind of people making decisions were just the people with like some excess money. So a dude has a couple $1,000s extra in his bank account, and he's like, fuck it, I'm going to give it to a couple of these guys to play, and I'll put my logo on it, right? Those types of guys didn't have either the time or the experience or the knowledge to like sit and watch a bunch of games and know who was good and who wasn't, right? So they were looking for people like me who could give them that advice while being relatable and accessible to players, and while supporting the players, because obviously again they're kind of hopeless with respect to like just doing basic things. And so that's where like the initial like esports manager position for me started. And it just kind of spiraled from there, where like I was successful with the team, and then either I would carry over with one of my players, like a player was successful and another team would be interested in them. There weren't really like safeguards against contract stuff, and there wasn't like long-term contract stuff. You were like doing it month by month or whatever. So it was very consistently like okay, I'm helping this team. Okay, I'm helping this team. Okay, I'm helping this team. And like this player's moving here, this player's moving here, this player's moving here. And I'm like making that transition with them. And that just continues to scale up until Pulse Esports, which is like my first organization where like I had we had like a jersey, and we had intentions of playing on LAN. Like we were going to go to a regional event nearby, like an annual event that normally was people playing Counter-Strike and that kind of stuff, but League was scaling enough that they were hosting a local tournament. And so as part of that, I was working with, hilariously enough, Sneaky, way back when. So Pulse Sneaky Castru is like super OG original name. And at the time, we like Pulse was like supporting us, but it was like a very, very like base low level. And at the time, Dignitas itself was becoming like a premier LCS, or it was like probably even pre-LCS. It was like basically when Rock Solid transitioned into becoming Dignitas. That was like one of the teams that became Dignitas in North America. And as a byproduct of that, it made the brand really attractive if you wanted to network and have access to Riot and have access to top pro players, right? Because this is all still probably like mid-high level League of Legends, where it's like players that were good enough to play at the highest level, but there wasn't like a consistent highest level to play at. And then there was probably like a one tier up, which was just like the famous streamers, right? These were players that like Scara and them who got renowned in North America because they streamed and everyone was like, oh, like these guys must be really, 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 really good, right? So like I was working with the players that maybe like weren't streamed. This is like before Sneaky even streamed. And so we ended up in a position where it made sense that I could convince Dignitas to acquire our roster from Pulse Esports. And as part of that acquisition, I made the transition. And so that was like the first, like, I guess, premier esports organization that I worked for was Dignitas. I worked under Michael Odell, who everyone else knows as Odie. He was the original guy running Dignitas. I think he stepped away now after like he made his money off of selling whatever portion of Dignitas made sense for him. And so now he's doing like Call of Duty for someone else. But I was working with them for a while, which is super great because that meant we got to go to one of our first real premier events and play in the qualification circuit to like try to get up to like the professional tier, which was a lot of fun, super sick. That I will never forget that event under any circumstance. And then that was like I get to meet Scar and I get to meet all these guys, and that's like the initial like networking phase that existed at the time. And then from there, I actually, funnily enough, the team I did not feel was capable of making. I think they could, but I didn't think they should. Like my team shouldn't and did not deserve to make the professional tier at the time. And we had just failed, but Dignitas was like, yeah, let's run it back. Let's do another 3-month split, and we'll try to qualify in 3 months. And at the time, I was looking at it, and I was like, I don't know if this roster is going to make sense. We're going to be very restricted because of roster rules. And so I actually said, I don't know. Like, we'll see. We'll think about it. Let's talk about it. And I was like, actually at the time, also talking to other teams about opportunities for my players that I felt deserved them. And in this case, that's where Cloud9 came up. Originally, and I'm sure Hai remembers this. I can't remember. We talked about it ages ago, but hilariously enough, oh, did our audio just die? Oh no. Oh no. What happened? Did it time out?
Whoop.
Oh, I think we just lost you. Cool.
Oh, great. So sorry. So this is when Hai, if Hai remembers this, with Cloud9. Actually, now that we stop real quick. So was the team that you helped kind of get acquired by Dignitas the same team that you were originally decided to help manage, or did you kind of go through a couple different iterations of different things?
Oh, tons of different iterations. So like the original Pulse roster was not the roster even then of the players that I played with. The players I played with were a team called 4-Not, or Team 4 Nothing, the letter or the number 4 and then nothing, 4-Not. 4-N-O-T-E, not N-A-U-G-H-T. Like we weren't that creative. And so like those players transitioned to another team that I can't even remember the name of. It's like Devious or something. And only like 2 or 3 of them made the transition, and I came with them. And then over time, those guys trickled out, and I replaced them with other players for an unnamed roster. And then the players that I trickled in were players like Sneaky and players like, it was like Zig and Daydream. It was like a bunch of players that like everybody would know now these days. And that's like the natural progression of like how we got there. Unfortunately, I don't think any of the original players that I played with maintained presence all the way up into like semi-pro or pro.
And from the beginning, it's always been League of Legends.
Yeah, so it was very purely League of Legends. My only other esports like history, and it wasn't even, I wouldn't even call it real history because it didn't have a real competitive scene, was, like I said, Enemy Territory Quake Wars, where there was just like online stuff that people like coordinated and set up, and like the game itself was inherently PvP, so there would be tournaments and stuff on the weekend, but there was never like a large scale event. There was never like a big broadcast or anything crazy like that. It was all just like You play tournaments, you have recordings that you share among all the other top players to show who won or who did well, but it didn't have like an audience and sponsors and a whole bunch of stuff like that scaling into it.
So from Pulse, you then got Dignitas to then acquire Pulse. You worked with Odell.
Yep.
Then from that, you then realized that this roster actually that you got them acquired is actually not the best roster for this team. And so you ended up deciding to trade or sell that original Pulse then Dignitas team to another team, which you then
I sold pieces of that original roster around in general. But what's funny is like my favorite story about all this is that Cloud9 didn't want Sneaky. Actually, they didn't have it. They actually had an AD carry by the name of Otter that they were happy with, that they were pulling on. And I didn't feel like Otter was as good as Sneaky. I thought he was an okay player. I thought he was a good guy, but I legitimately thought Sneaky was like an all-star level talent that needed and should be at the highest level. And I was very frustrated and I was very disappointed in my team that we failed to qualify in the first place. And then their reaction to our failure to qualify cemented the fact in my head that no one except Sneaky on this team really deserved to go into the LCS.
Wow.
And I stand by that. Like I genuinely meant that. And I shared this with Hai, who did not know who I was, by the way. I was just like a complete random at the time with respect to like talking to Cloud9 and what they were trying to do, because Hai had been very close to qualifying to the LCS already, and I was like the next tier below that. And what's funny is he said no initially. He actually was like, again, we're not interested. Like, there's no reason. Like, blah blah blah. And I was like, no, like I'm adamant, and like I'm like, dude, I know you don't know who I am, and like it probably sounds like I'm talking up my ass, but I legitimately think you should consider him. And he's like, well, I mean, it doesn't matter because Lemon's not around, Lemonation. And they would have to play together for, like, I wouldn't, like, just pick up Sneaky. Like, Lemon would have to play with him and want to. And I was like, okay, when's Lemon back? And he's like, well, I mean, it's going to be a little bit. And, like, I don't know if we have time. Like, we have, like, submit rosters and we're trying to, like, move into a house. And it's, like, a whole thing. And I was like, no, I'm serious. Like, I legitimately mean it. And like this is like has to be the most wholesome moment in the history of my career. But Hai was like, you know what? Okay, I'm so fucking good at this game, because obviously Hai is so humble. He's like, I'm just gonna play support with him. He's like, I'm just gonna go like duo with him and I'll play support and I'll like judge if he's good or not. And I was like, because obviously role swapping at the time, like role swapping was not a thing. No one actually seriously considered it as like objectively a thing. And this sounds like the most unfair thing that's happened in the history of League of Legends, right? Where like you want to be on a team and the mid laner's like, yeah, I'll just dual lane with you and decide if you're a good player or not. So Hai did that, and it finished, and Hai was like, oh, he seems all right. Like, he's probably good enough to at least try to play with Lemon. Like, again, we already have Otter. Like, Otter is easy for us because we don't have to get him from an organization. And in our case, I have to convince Dignitas to be okay letting Sneaky go, because there wasn't like capital or funding to like try to do buyouts back then for this kind of stuff. But he's like, but like Lemon's got time and like Otter's busy anyway, so like I'll just let them play together. But what's funny is like right after I talked to Hai, I talked to Zach Sneaky in TeamSpeak, and I was just like, hey, how'd it go? And he's like, dude, Hai is the greatest fucking player that has like ever played this game.
Wow.
And I was like, what? He's like, dude, like if he ever plays support, he will be the best support that's ever played. He's insane. Like, he just knows like what to do, and he makes the game insanely easy for me. Like, I can just go forward and like he just tells me when to go forward, he tells me to back up. He just told me everything. Like, I didn't have to think. I just like did what he said. And I only had to focus on like right clicking, basically, like mechanics, and it felt amazing. And I was like, well, yeah, obviously, I was like, that's super cool, and that's super sick for you, and I'm happy, but like, remember you have to play with Lemon, and that's really matters. He's like, no, like I know, I need to play with Hai. Like, this is cool. And I remember those conversations so vividly, which is so hilarious to me now looking back on it. But yeah, obviously you can imagine what the outcome of the story ends up being. is that Sneaky plays with Lemon. Lemon's pretty happy, pretty impressed. They agree, like, okay, yeah, this kid makes sense. And so then I had to turn around and I had to have a very serious conversation with Odie, saying, hey, I know this is not standard, but I think you should let Sneaky. I think we should let Sneaky out of his contract. I think we should let him go play with High and Lemon and this like initiative they're trying to build. Because this was like, I think this was like before. Pretty sure this was like even before Jack. Like this was like Cloud9, but it wasn't like Cloud9 the company or the brand.
Quantum or Quantic?
Well, they were Cloud9. They were just called Cloud9. Like the team called themselves Cloud9, and they were picked up by Quantic. And then I want to say after that they got acquired by Jack to be like the Cloud9 as a company. But before that, they were Cloud9 and there wasn't a logo. They were just called that because that was like a word or a name or something that like High or someone liked. But anyways, yeah, they I had to like talk to Odie and got him to sign off on it. But the thing is, like that was effectively, like I said, the dagger to the team I was working with. So it was like bittersweet in that I got to help Zach like be where I thought he deserved to be, but at the same time, it ended up being kind of fucked for me in that I was like, you know, murdering my team in cold blood at that point, and putting myself in a position where I need to be finding another one, right? And that's where I kind of spin and turn and do some other stuff and end up starting my own initiative at the time called The Walking Zed. Which is like I even had someone made like this like terrible logo where it was like Zed, but it was like zombified, so it's like The Walking Zed. And that team I ended up convincing Jack to pick up as the original Cloud9 Challenger initiative called Cloud9 Tempest. Should we go all the way through Cloud9 Tempest into Cloud9 proper, or where would you like the halfway point to be? Because like we don't add the S to esports until after about 3 to 4 months at Cloud9.
I've never heard this history before, so it's really interesting to me. So as far deep as you think is interesting, I want you to go. Okay. So if you think that Tempest like is interesting, because so far with kind of the pulse into Dignitas into then all the trades that are going on, it was very interesting of how quickly it went into essentially that realm of which is dealing with the personnel of the person, but then of the team, but then also of like the inter-team and of the leagues, and just of understanding how it all works. And being able to,
well, and it's funny, it gets a lot more intricate from here on out. So everything before this was kind of unregulated. It was pretty free form. There wasn't a consistent player base of players that you could point at and say, okay, that's like a top player. And so a lot of it was like gut checking, and a lot of it was grinding. A lot of it was just like playing games with players that you're like, I have no idea, but we have to play games to find out. And you found out, no, this guy is not going to be a pro player. There started being more of a method to the madness, and there started being consistency at the next layer because they initialized the actual challenger division. The LCS had made it through its first like traditional year, and things were starting to like stabilize across the board, which is why Cloud9 Tempest was like such a pivotal point for all of this, because that was like probably one of the first more legitimate initiatives they had on a like talent development level. And it meant that teams like Cloud9 could pay attention and care. There wasn't like a good system underneath LCS prior, because LCS itself was developing. So like they had less than zero focus on like the random area below LCS, because they didn't even know what LCS was yet. LCS had relegation. LCS was like this crazy mystical beast thing that they didn't know what it was going to be yet. So there was no attention given to the initiatives below it, and it wouldn't have made sense to. But this was like the first attempt they made, and that's what manifested an opportunity for something like Cloud9 Tempest to be. And so that roster, this is where we start hitting a lot of players that a lot of people know, like Yuzuki, and then Kez, or what people knew him as Core Kez. Players like Bishu and Alltech. there was like Glebe Glarbu, like a handful of players that have like played for, in this case I just listed off players that have played for Cloud9, players that have played for TSM, players that have played for Evil Geniuses, players that have played now for Immortals, across the board. Kez also is now still relevant in Overwatch. I want to say he is on one of the management teams for one of the Overwatch League teams. These are like players that are like well renowned and respected. Cloud9 Tempest was interesting in that it was the first like foray into like uncharted territory with respect to how you transition in a promotion relegation system. Because here's the challenge. In a promotion relegation system, when you promote and you play up into the relegation category, it gets complicated because suddenly you're staring down the barrel of potentially having 2 LCS teams. So Cloud9 held an LCS team and a challenger team, because it wasn't called Academy at the time, and the challenger team could qualify in and earn LCS status, but you're not allowed to own 2 teams in the LCS because obviously there's a huge conflict of interest where you could just match fix against yourself for funsies. And so they actually ended up killing a lot of like the methodology and like tweaked it around to try to make it regulated. But the end all be all ended up being that if you make LCS, you kind of have to split off and do your own thing. So what's funny is like my original Cloud9 work was all centered and built around the concept of, if this goes well enough, and like Cloud9 invests in us, we don't get to return the favor because we have to go be our own company and do our own thing. Luckily, Jack was understanding of this. Like he respected and understood what it was, and he understood like the actual investment amount for him is not a lot, but the amount of like backup and support he gets from like a substitute level is reasonable. And at the time, like to maintain and upkeep in a challenger team was pretty low. So the exposure of being a dominant second tier team was still worth it. Like it made sense as an investment for Cloud9. But the whole time that I was doing that, Jack was also helping me build out what would be a separate organization, which I don't even know if we've ever talked about this before. It was going to be called Torch. So it was going to like I think it was just going to be called Torch, but obviously people would inevitably call it Torch Esports or Torch Gaming or something, but we were just going to call it Torch. And I had probably like 20 different layers of like pathways of how that team was going to build out and what it was going to look like. This was like right on the cusp of imports starting to exist, like the concept of importing coming to be. And I was actually one of the teams that was in the most prime position to make the transition because I had multiple players. I had like 2 or 3 players who spoke Korean already that were domestic, so it wouldn't count against the rules. And so I had a bunch of like fun flowcharts of rosters of players I was talking to and negotiating with and plans for when we made LCS. Because again, we were effectively a shoe-in for how dominant we were. For the 2 splits we were in Challenger, we were just destroying everybody anywhere adjacent to us. And some of this I'm going to misremember because there's actually multiple splits where it was like very dramatic and a whole different thing. But the one thing I will always remember and point out is this was still before there were final regulations on the promotion relegation system. And so a really interesting and a really kind of a fucked thing happened with respect to, I think I can't remember if it was Walking Zed or Cloud9 Tempest, but we were very dominant. We were very aggressively dominant in the challenger scene. And it was very clear, like when we scrimmed the lower level LCS teams, that we were going to qualify into LCS. And this was like way back. This was before like these days where things are kind of like closer. This is back when you could have a team that's this good and a team that's like this, like on the ground bad in the LCS. And it would be totally not unheard of like to have a 0-16 team in the LCS because it was like so unregulated and so kind of chaotic. So what ended up happening though is that we were very dominant and we went like, I don't know, like 16-1 or something in our regular season, and we dominated our playoffs, right? So we go to the promotion tournament and we're facing a team that I think they went 0-16 or they went 1-15. Like they were probably one of the worst teams in the history of LCS. And I shit you not, they sold their LCS spot after they had been relegated, they got knocked into the relegation tournament. They sold their spot to Evil Geniuses, which sounds innocent enough. Okay, like Evil Geniuses basically is buying this like worthless spot because it's just a relegation tournament. They're going to come in, the roster is terrible, and they're just going to lose, and then they're just going to be a challenger team in North America. Even though EG at the time was like known as like a prestigious like endemic esports brand. This is where they found out that there were abuse cases because there weren't roster locks back then. So what ended up happening is Evil Geniuses bought the LCS slot and then turned around and signed the entire effectively CLG EU roster, like a significant portion of it or all of it, like 4/5 of it, right? And CLG EU, for those who aren't aware, like back then there weren't locks on how many teams you could have globally. It was per region, so you could only have one LCS team per region, but you could have an LCS team and a Europe team. CLG EU was much better than CLG. CLG EU was much better than every team in North America. CLG EU was a world championship qualifying team that got like, I'd have to double check, but I want to say they got like top 4 at Worlds. But Europe didn't pay as well. So all the players were super down to come play for Evil Geniuses in North America. So instead of, we go into the promotion relegation match, it's a best of 5, and we have to win to qualify into the LCS. Normally, this is a top challenger team versus one of, if not the lowest, LCS team. Instead, it became a top North American challenger team against a literal like world championship qualified team, which it was still competitive, crazily enough, but obviously not a shoo-in for us by any stretch of the imagination. And it immediately prompted Riot to change the rule set. But obviously, money had already exchanged hands, and this wasn't against the rules. So they turned around and said, hey, like, I'm sorry, we can't, like, block this, but now we're going to be imposing, like, a regional import restriction. So, like, this is when it started as, like, that's where it started, where it's, like, you can only have 2 imports out of 5. And there's going to be roster locks. So even if a team wanted to like pull in 2 amazing imports, they can't do it at relegation. They have to do it like halfway through the LCS split, and they'll probably make playoffs if they do that kind of thing, instead of falling into relegation and then suddenly you're facing a top European team instead of facing a bottom NA team. But again, these are all the regulation stuff they imposed after our match. So I had an amazingly, probably like a top 5 LCS NA team, maybe a top 4 actually, that just got aggressively shafted by the original system and how it existed. And that like stalled out my like scaling up to the LCS sooner than it definitely should have been in the first place, which was like insanely wild.
I feel like you could do an entire segment just on what rules are in place now because of the disasters that happened.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like you can definitely break down like, okay, why does this rule exist? Like, is it precautionary because we don't want something to happen, or is it as a reaction to something that did happen? In most cases, yeah, this is actually stuff that's happened that we're like, we probably shouldn't be okay with that anymore. Like, this sounds like a problem. This was damaging to our ecosystem. It was damaging to the teams and the brands inside the space. All of this. Franchising is a good example. Like, franchising as a concept is a whole thing that wasn't, that they didn't originally build the LCS like, we want to do franchising, we're going to get there, we'll figure it out. It was very much like, franchising isn't even a concept, we're doing LCS, we want it to be a competitive promotion relegation. And then eventually they saw the damage promotion relegation does to the ecosystem, to like the environment around the LCS and all of its like related properties. They recognized like the lack of stability basically terrifies investors with respect to like trying to scale and be more and bigger. Like, people can complain as much as they want. Europe does all the time about how they don't believe in the franchising as a concept is bad because like soccer doesn't do it. They believe like promotion relegation as a concept is like more competitive, and like that might be true. Like in a very pure sense, maybe like promotion relegation like it's like more base instinct level competitive because it's literally live or die. Like your team either exists or doesn't exist based on winning. But from a balance and stability standpoint, it's mentally taxing on everybody in the space, and it's very unhealthy for the economics of your esport.
All right, so how close are we to you getting the Cloud9?
So that was Cloud9 Tempest, which is like the first initial. That was the first initiative for Cloud9 dabbling into Challenger.
And is that what you would call you as your manager at C9?
Yeah, so I would just call myself Challenger manager, team manager, whatever it would have been at Cloud9 back then. I'm sure I've got emails that say what my title was. I think it was something along those lines. And then when we got shocked the way we did, and I think that was the first time we got shocked and things were like, what the hell? The next time, the next time, so I ran that roster back. I came back and I had another very competitive roster because that roster was like a couple different players. The next iteration of the roster was also insanely competitive. And looked like another shoe-in for making LCS. And then I'm not even kidding, and I love him to death, but at this point, I can probably phrase it and it doesn't sound as bad. But legitimately, there were outside forces that kind of like made our qualification into the LCS like insanely tumultuous. Because before, like we were about to qualify into LCS, and we heard whisperings and became aware that TSM was going to take our support. Like literally in the middle of our playoffs, we became like aware. There was like a conversation, like, and what's funny is like normally back then you would just hear whispers of people talking, but in this case, people were hanging out because we flew in for a weekend into LA where TSM was because we had our playoffs. And while we were there, I want to say they invited them over to their house, which wasn't super suspect because it's just players hanging out, but it ended up being like, I think it was like Wild Turtle or whoever, like some of their players like hanging out very specifically with our support player. And then I got notified by Jack, because obviously this was a Cloud9 team and Jack has the contract, that like because of how we'd structured, which was totally normal, like he was just going to go there, which normally wouldn't be that big of a deal. It's like, okay, we'll qualify to LCS and then he'll go there and we'll get another support, whatever. But like timeline wise, it was just very strenuous, and that was like a big deal, right? Making it on TSM is like obviously the dream back then for every single player. So it was very obvious there was like an emotional reaction, and kind of like, I would almost call it like a checking out. Like maybe Nick would disagree with me. I don't know where Glebe is today, but I would say like to me and to the rest of the players, like it was like a visible difference in attitude and perspective and play from the moment it was clear that there was that interest. Like there was that pressure. There was like two things. One, there was pressure to play well, but there was also like a lack of pressure. Like this match doesn't matter for him because if we don't make it, he just goes straight to TSM. If we do make it, we kind of have to have like a conversation of how he gets to TSM, right? And so there was like always this underlying pressure, I think, on all of the players on the team back then. And again, they could all attribute to it. Or they could all confirm it as well. That match became like surprisingly challenging for us. And we ended up losing. I think we lost like 2-3 to like a bottom LCS team that we should never lose to normally. And that was probably the most devastating loss, because the first loss was devastating, but only to a point of, okay, the system elected to fuck you, and that happens sometimes, but we fixed it, so it can't happen anymore. But this was like a whole different level of, you do everything you possibly can correctly, and other people can just like have direct, clear impact on your roster. Like this is probably why, like, for example, poaching rules exist the way they do these days. I think a lot of the conversations that probably happened back then maybe wouldn't have been allowed to happen even vaguely today. And that one was like so much more painful, I think, because it was like in quick succession with the last time I'd kind of gotten screwed by the system. And that one fell out of our hands. I think for the first one, it's like, okay. Actually, I want to add some drama to that first one. The format for how it worked, you picked your opponent. That's why it was even more dramatic. So there were 3 LCS teams at the bottom. You got to pick which one you wanted to face. So guess what we did? We picked the last place team that we knew we were going to beat. But we would have beaten any of those 3. We would have beaten any of those 3. But it just so happens that the bottom team is the one that EG purchased. But they purchased after we selected the teams. And we're like, okay, Riot, that's fine. We just get to pick one of the other teams. And like, no, that's not fair to the other teams. And I'm like, but this is fair to us. So like, I mean, this isn't against the rules technically. And I'm like, what? Ooh. Yeah. So that's why it was like so much more dramatic, where we picked our opponent for what should have been a shoe-in match for us to be in the LCS. And then the carpet got pulled out from under, so a whole bunch of stuff kind of happened. And that was like, again, that was devastating because from like a regulation standpoint, but at least it was like fixed. The next one was just like kind of soul crushing. And the fact that like we were going to lose our support. Inevitably what ended up happening is we lost more players because we lost our support. And at the same time, I was kind of running out of steam of like what I was going to do. And I legitimately knew and felt I deserved to be in the LCS. And it was like clear to me that for some reason the universe was like very against this concept. And so that was like a particular kind of soul crushing. But what's crazy is that was like the worst, best day of my life, because I went outside and I was fucking bawling. I was just destroyed out of my mind. And the weirdest, wildest, crazy thing happened. So Complexity had a roster back then that was also at that tournament. They were another challenger team, just like they were the second seed challenger team. We were the first seed. We picked the bottom seed. They picked the second bottom seed because they got to pick after us. And they were like, okay, but they probably shouldn't win because they were facing Team Coast. And Team Coast was a team who 1 split or 2 splits before had been in the finals. Like, Team Coast was a legitimate contender for the championship. This was like original Zion Spartan being dominant. This was original Mash Me being like dominant. These were good fucking players. And it might have even been like Shifter. These were good fucking players. And I'm outside bawling. I'm just exhausted. I just had like a terrible, terrible experience. And I'm not even kidding. The head coach of Complexity was Koobs, who like a lot of people know him for like a whole bunch of different reasons I'm not going to go into. But Koobs came outside and he should have been miserable, right? Because he really wanted to make LCS, but his team wasn't good enough. And they were facing Coast, who's like a legitimately good team that just like kind of like had like a rough split and just like landed in the relegation territory, but they were just gonna win out, right? And I'm not even kidding. He comes outside, and I want to say they didn't reverse sweep, but I think they won like 3-2 or 3-1 out of fucking nowhere, which nobody saw coming, including themselves, by the way. Like, they were not prepared or equipped for this whatsoever. Like, they had not planned for making LCS. And he comes outside and he's like, hey, I know you're having a rough day. Obviously, I respect the hell out of you because you're the number 1 team in Challenger. We're the number 2 team in Challenger. I'm gonna ask Complexity to hire you. Like, if they're willing, would you take that? And at the time, I was still fucking confused because I was like, I'm not gonna go. Why would I work for Complexity in Challenger when I'm working for C9 in Challenger? Like, C9's just the better Challenger team, whatever. He's like, no, we won. And I was like, what? And I was just flabbergasted. Everybody, the whole scene was just like kind of in a soft riot about like what the hell, because Complexity had been an LCS team that had aggressively bombed out. Like, they were a first round LCS team that immediately tanked into just complete shit and was like very, very, very swiftly relegated. So they were kind of like this joke of like, okay, Complexity obviously isn't good enough or capable enough to like maintain a roster for this. Even though they were like very competitive, tons of they were like a very well renowned like Counter-Strike and Call of Duty teams, that kind of stuff. But League just like kind of wasn't their forte. But he said that And at first, again, I thought it was a joke, yada yada. And then eventually, I'm literally talking on the phone with their owners, and they're like, we need help. Like, everyone speaks very highly of you. Like, well, down to talk to Jack, but Jack said nothing but good things. Coop says great things. All of our players say it's got to be you, and we need help here in LA. They're like, can you move to LA? And I'd just flown for like the second time in my life. So this was like I was like shell shocked at this point. Because I had a whole plan for an esports organization that wasn't Complexity. I had a whole plan for a bunch of players and a bunch of like branding and a website and a bunch of stuff that had nothing to do with this. That was all ready, and I just had to push the go button to like start it the second we won our series. And instead, I went from like gonna be a top LCS team, we're insane, new brand, like we're gonna crush it, into okay, how did we happen to lose this game? Like that should never happen. This is insane. To okay, somehow Complexity is like an LCS and they want me as their GM, and they want me to move to LA like now. All in the course of like a 3-hour span. That was like the single most like insanely tumultuous, like worst best day of my life, I would say. And that's kind of how I landed on Complexity as their LCS general manager, which did not last super long. It was about 6 months before that roster unfortunately was relegated for things it's not worth going into. Like back then there wasn't like a ton of capital budget. Complexity wasn't like stabilized, or like the way they were operated wasn't built to be super competitive with the other LCS teams yet. They were trying to like scale and find their investors and that kind of stuff. And this was before that. So they were still in the planning phase. They were still planning to be an LCS team and planning to be an esports Goliath. They weren't in the, okay, let's be an esports Goliath, right? They weren't in that phase yet. So it was like just like a slight mismatch of like timeline. But hilariously enough, getting relegated ended up working out very well for me because it actually opened up my contract so that Jack could ask me to come back on as the general manager for his LCS team. So instead of coming back in Challenger, he wanted me to come back and work with High, Sneaky, Meteos, Lemon, and Balls.
Let's end it there.
Yeah, that's probably the best start. We'll add the S to esports next week.
A couple things. First off, to kind of wrap this up, I like that moment of just crying after all that situation, because there were so many things when you're that early in the space. So many ridiculous things happen, like what you just said, which was. And
those weren't even the most ridiculous ones.
Yeah.
Those are just the ones that happened to me.
So, so if you guys did win, but then would you have started your own esports company?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep, that was the game plan. I wonder if I still have the logos for that anywhere.
Do you still seek that, or because it seems like the way it's played out for you is that you've kind of essentially been able to do the same thing, but just not having to worry about the capital and the organization.
Mm-hmm. Oh my god, I still actually have some of the forms and that kind of stuff. I have my old Walking Zed logo. I wonder if I can bring this on stream. Let me see if I can save it. Let's look at this like amazing old Walking Zed logo. Wait till you see this.
So is the team going to be called Walking Zed?
No.
Way back.
No.
What were you going to call?
The other team was going to be called Torch.
Oh, wait.
So Walking Zed was a team I did have. That was like a team with a logo we were in Challenger, but we weren't sponsored. So we just needed to have something. And other people put up like dumb paint pictures. And I was like, I'll just actually put something up.
Wait, so then did Jack ask you to build Torch, or did you want to build Torch and then pitched it to Jack?
It was kind of like it's a natural byproduct of like the way things were going, because Riot like made it super clear, like, hey, you can have a Challenger team, but if they make it, they can't be another Cloud9 team. Like that was like very obvious and clear. And so that was like just a natural like progression of that.
Yeah.
Because there was no alternative. Like
Got it.
The alternative was B, he drops the team and they have to like find a sponsor. But there's no upside or there's no build out there. So like we talked about, he's like, yeah, you can just be another esports team. And I was like that made sense to me at the time for sure.
So another question that I had is like, you've been in the space for a long time and you've seen people since the very beginning, and a lot of those names that you talked about like are very familiar. But how many people did not make it through, and did that number get smaller the longer, like, in other words, that when you first started off, was it 90% of all those people did not make it in esports, but then over time, like, more and more people like stayed in?
I don't know. I feel like we've chopped off like a significant amount of people. Like thousands of people have churned through this industry and been spit out the other side. It requires insane amounts of hours relative to most other jobs, I would say. And especially at the entry level and even at like the mid-tier level, it's still not as lucrative as like a normal job, for damn sure. So I think a lot of people got burnt out. A lot of people weren't fit to do it in the first place, and so they couldn't kind of keep up. And then simultaneously, hilariously enough, it's just a very competitive industry. So inevitably, you get people who are interested in being competitive, and you get people who are just very good at what they do, and that ends up obviously pushing a lot of people out of the space. So I would say on average, like we maybe 1% or less of people who want to be in esports like get into esports. And of the original people that like I entered esports with, like just off the top of my head, people that I started going into esports with, there's Agent, he's an agent for players. His name is Ferris Gansman. He worked for UTA. I think he's freelance now. It's a very insanely short list of people that like specifically I remember working with before they like made their way into esports. Like I either played with them or like they were doing analyst work with me or they were managing alongside me. Just an insanely small pool of people. Like if I look at like managers in the LCS, for example, I'm trying to think if there's any managers that are older than me, like that have been around longer than I have, that like, I think like there are managers who have been at LCS longer. So like Parth, because Parth was a coach in LCS before I was a manager in LCS. But I was a manager in Challenger before Parth was a coach in LCS. And I'm not even sure he ever was in Academy. I'm trying to think if there's anyone in the LCS other than like obvious players like Reggie and like Doublelift. But like I played back when Doublelift was a support player. In case you weren't aware, that's where he started. He was a blitz main bot lane. Actually, he was kind of a blitz main everywhere. Back then, support was like a whole different archetype of thing. Like you like roamed all over. You didn't just sit bot lane with the AD. You kind of like just fucked around in the jungle and like pulled people, and you played old Taric, and it was just a weird thing. But yeah, off the top of my head, it's really hard to think of like the people that like I came up into esports with. I'm probably like the 0.0001% of those people. And even again now, maybe 1% of people who want to get into esports get in. Like definitely our inbox is overflowing with people who are interested in finding a pathway. But obviously the industry is not that big. Like it's reasonably sized, it's scaling, it's trying to grow, but we're not, none of us are the NBA or the NFL yet, and we don't have stadiums that we're outfitting. We don't have 53 player rosters to upkeep. So as it stands right now, very, very few people get into or in esports in general.
Would you have made it as a player to this day? And then would you have enjoyed it as much as you enjoy the work that you do now?
I legitimately am very confident I would have made it as a player for sure. Like I was very competitive. Usually when I pick up a game and I play it consistently, I end up playing it like at a very high level, and I understand it and I can communicate about it at a very high level. There's a reason I'm able to pick up and like manage so many different esport titles so quickly and so easily, and navigate and be relatable and accessible. And I think all of those things would have been huge bonuses for also being a teammate of a player. As it stands right now, obviously those are invaluable assets for invaluable skill sets even for being a manager. But a lot of that stuff, like a lot of what I do, if you can also have the high level capacity for play, like players do, then you can kind of like double up on all of these like these good graces and be a better teammate and be a more well-rounded player for the team you're on. And that's like I think a lot of the upside of like the mentality and attitude that I have. But yeah, no, I'm pretty confident. Like I played tournaments, I won local events. Like my only limitation obviously was I saw no viable pathway that would make sense, and I would never expect like. And to be clear, I didn't go ask people to support me and they said no. I know who I am and my principles, and I would never do that to people. Now again, a lot of players do that, and like that's their decision. I'm not gonna harangue them about it. But I would never like go to my parents, and I would never go to my grandparents and say I want to just like drop everything I'm doing and like stall out what I'm doing in my life. Because I like to play video games. And that's what it was back then. Back then, you were not, and there was no justification, even vaguely, for saying, oh, I want to do this as a career. There wasn't. Not even kind of. The people who were doing it back then were very selfish.
And on that note, thank you, Danan, for making the time, and we'll pick this up next week.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.
End the broadcast. We
need to do the... Oh, actually, while I've got friends and family watching, look, like my oncoming scar. It's quality, right? This is the first time I've seriously burnt myself since I was like 8. When I was 8, I fell in a fire. Good times. I burnt the shit out of like all of this, and I had to like wear casts on it for like weeks. And I had to have someone sit in my class with me and like do my writing assignments and stuff. It was a good time. Which is crazy. Like the doctor said I was insanely lucky, because you'll notice I have like no scarring whatsoever. My hands are fucking pristine. I have like no marks. I don't even have moles or anything. Like my hands are like really nice.
Wow.
And my wrists and everything. It's actually insane. Oh man. I just realized there's a reason Brian's popping off in chat, by the way. That's my stepdad. He doesn't have all his fingers, because he had a similar accident at an older age. I think he was like 17 or something, and he decided to like yeet like. Let me see if I can get this right. He basically yeeted like this amount, like from like here to I'm doing this wrong. He basically yeeted like this section of his hand off. So he just like he has I think they call it. He has this. He has an inky. The pinky without the P. He's just got an inky. And then like, yeah, he yeeted the 3 on each hand. Yeah. So I think he was like pushing a thing through a thing, and he just fucking zzz and zzz.
Oof.
Which is even more tragic because he's a mechanic. So he needs his hands. Those hands are pretty fucking valuable. I think they reattached one of them. It looks kind of funny though. I can't remember like why. I think it's like a little sideways or something. Brian can remind me. But yeah, so when I say my hand, I fell in a fire and they all got fucked up, but everything's great and I got really lucky. He's just sitting there like, all right, you little son of a bitch. Fuck. All but 2 they reattached, I guess. Which is why he's got an inky. Oh, attached 2 in the wrong spot. Nice. The good old-fashioned, what was this, like 80s doctoring? What else we got in chat? We got 7 people watching this? What are you guys doing today? What's going on? Who's in here?
All right, Danan.
I'm holding Mark. No, I'm holding Mark hostage.
You can keep broadcasting.
Okay.
Stop recording.